My father called me dead weight in front of an entire loan committee. Not in private. Not during an argument. In a bank conference room, while standing beside the project plan I had written for him. And instead of crying, yelling, or begging him to admit what he had done, I did the one thing my family never expected from me. I stayed quiet. I gathered the records. And I let the paperwork speak first. My name is Maya Brooks, and I was 31 when my father taught me that being useful to a family does not mean being loved by one. That folder in my hands had my original project plan, my email drafts, the deleted protection language for the graduation fund, and one number my father had not realized I noticed. A notary reference number. At the time, I did not know exactly what it would prove. I only knew that a signature always leaves a shadow. And my father had spent years teaching me to look for shadows. If you want to hear how one signature log changed everything they tried to erase, stay with me. The deed history does not shout, but it remembers. I am a risk manager by profession, which sounds boring, until you understand what it means. It means I get paid to notice what confident people hope no one will check. I read timelines. I compare versions. I ask why one paragraph disappeared between draft 4 and draft 5. I ask why a signature date does not match the meeting schedule. I ask why someone says, "Trust me," right after removing the one clause that would have protected everyone else. My father hated that about me. Not always openly. For most of my life, he called it something softer. He said, I was cautious. He said I overthought things. He said I had a hard time relaxing. When I was younger, I used to believe those were personality comments. Later, I understood they were warnings. They meant, stop looking. My father's name was Richard Brooks, and he had built his whole life around being respected in rooms where no one asked too many questions. He owned part of a local development company that handled community projects, small commercial renovations, and land deals that always sounded more generous when he described them at church than they looked on paper. He was not a loud man in public. That was Lorraine's job at home. Lorraine could turn a family dinner into a performance review, without raising her voice. She married my father when I was 15, and by the time I graduated high school, she had mastered the art of making cruelty sound like concern. Maya, sweetheart, do you really need to correct him in front of people? Maya, maybe your standards are why you feel so alone. Maya, your father works so hard, you could try being easier. Dennis Caldwell was always around for the public version of our family. He was not blood, but he had been my father's friend for 30 years, which in my father's mind made him more reliable than any daughter. Dennis had a wide smile, silver hair, and a habit of repeating my father's opinions with slower words, so they sounded official. If my father said I was difficult, Dennis called me unusually rigid. If my father said I was ungrateful, Dennis called me resistant to family unity. If my father wanted a witness, Dennis appeared with a pen and a face full of fake concern. That was the cast. My father, the respected man. Lorraine, the soft enforcer. Dennis, the friendly witness. And me, the useful daughter who knew where the files were. For years, my role in the family had been practical. I remembered insurance deadlines. I fixed online accounts. I reviewed lease language. I explained tax notices. I found misplaced bank statements. I built spreadsheets for family events no one thanked me for. If something went wrong, they called me before they called anyone else. If something went right, my father said he had handled it. I used to tell myself that did not matter. I told myself families were not workplaces. I told myself love was not supposed to require attribution. That was a beautiful thought. It was also the thought that made me easy to use. The project that broke everything started with a phone call on a Tuesday evening. My father called while I was eating reheated pasta over my sink, because I had worked late and did not have the energy to pretend dinner was an event. Maya, he said, in the voice he used when he wanted something but planned to act generous about it. I need your eyes on a proposal. I asked what kind. He said it was a funding packet for a mixed-use community development project tied to a property the family had controlled for years. There would be small business space, a training center, And, he said, a scholarship component for local students. That caught me. Not the development project. Not the committee. The students. My mother had been a school secretary before she died, and she had believed graduation was a sacred thing. Not because everyone needed college, but because every child needed one day when the adults in the room acted like their future mattered. My father knew that. So when he told me the proposal included a graduation fund, he knew exactly which door he was opening. He said, "I thought you might appreciate that part. I should have heard the hook in it." Instead, I heard my mother. I agreed to review the packet. That review became a rewrite. The rewrite became a full risk plan. The full risk plan became budget controls, compliance safeguards, timeline modeling, and a protected section for the graduation fund. I built a clean structure around the fund, so it could not be casually reallocated into the family development reserve. I wrote that phrase myself. Protected section. Not suggestion. Not aspiration. Protected section. When I sent the draft to my father, he replied 2 hours later. Good start. That was it. No thank you. No recognition. Just good start, as if I had handed him a grocery list. I kept working anyway. For the next 4 weeks, I spent evenings after work tightening the packet. I checked public grant requirements. I flagged reporting risks. I created a simple monitoring process. I built a timeline that made the project look not just attractive, but safe. My father loved safety when it made him look trustworthy. He hated safety when it limited what he could touch. The first sign that something was off came in week 2. I asked to be included in the next planning call, and my father said, "No need, I will summarize." I said, "If they ask risk questions, I should be there." He paused. Then he said, "You are helping in the background, Maya. Do not make this about titles." That sentence stayed with me. Do not make this about titles. People only say that when titles already matter. The second sign came from Lorraine. She called me on a Saturday morning while I was cleaning my apartment. I remember standing next to a laundry basket full of towels, listening to her sigh like I had personally inconvenienced her. "Your father says you are getting a little possessive about the proposal," she said. I told her I was just keeping the version history clear. She laughed softly. "Oh, honey, your little draft is not a published novel. Your little draft." 3 weeks later, she would call that same document your father's proposal. The third sign came from Dennis. He sent me a message that said, "Richard mentioned you may need some reassurance. Everyone knows you helped. Everyone knows you helped. Not wrote. Not built. Helped." I stared at that message for a long time. Then I saved it. By then, my professional instincts had started humming. Not screaming, just humming. The way a refrigerator hums in the background until the power goes out, and you realize it had been there the whole time. I started preserving everything. Not because I planned revenge. Because that is what I do when people change language around money. I saved drafts. I exported email threads. I downloaded attachments. I kept calendar invites. I named every file by date. At work, this was basic hygiene. In my family, it was treated like a character flaw. One night, after my father ignored 3 direct questions about the final submission, I texted my best friend Elena. I wrote, "Can you see me? Like, seriously. Can anyone in this family see me unless I am fixing something?" She replied with a meme that said, "Me when I'm needy but my family is busy pretending my labor fell from the sky." I laughed so hard I almost cried. Not because it was funny. Because it was too accurate. That was my whole role in one stupid sentence. Me when I am needy, but my father is busy rewriting the family record. The week before the loan committee meeting, I finally received what he called the final packet. He did not send it in editable format. He sent a flat PDF. That was sign number 4. People who expect collaboration do not send flat PDFs at the end of a process. They send them when they want the conversation to stop. I opened it at my kitchen table, with my laptop on one side, and coffee going cold on the other. At first glance, the packet looked familiar. Too familiar. My structure was there. My tables were there. My risk language was there. My contingency plan was there. But my name was gone. Not reduced. Gone. The author line listed Richard Brooks. The development reserve language had been changed. The graduation fund was no longer locked in its own protected section. It had been softened into a flexible community benefit reserve, which sounded kind until you understood what it meant. It meant my father could move money around and still claim the children were included. I scrolled slowly. I found a page near the end with a signature block tied to a document reference. And there it was. The notary reference number. I had not signed anything. I had not approved that final language. But the packet was carrying a notary trail, as if the sequence were clean. I wrote the number down. Then I took a screenshot. Then I saved the whole packet twice. One copy on my laptop. One copy in cloud storage. I slept maybe 3 hours that night. Not because I was shocked. Shock is loud. This was colder than that. This was the feeling you get when every odd comment suddenly lines up. The planning calls I was not invited to. Lorraine calling my work a little draft. Dennis saying everyone knew I helped. My father refusing to discuss titles. The flat PDF. The changed graduation fund language. It was not confusion. It was choreography. The loan committee meeting was held in a private room on the second floor of a regional bank building. I had been there once before for work. I remembered the carpet because it was that strange corporate blue that always looks clean and tired at the same time. I arrived 10 minutes early. My father was already there. So were Lorraine and Dennis. That was not expected. I had been told the meeting would include the committee, my father, and me as the risk planning support. Lorraine gave me a bright little smile. Dennis looked at my folder, and then away. My father did not look surprised to see me. He looked irritated. That was when I understood he had wanted me there, but not as a contributor. He wanted me there as a prop. The meeting began with polite introductions. My father spoke beautifully. He always did when the audience did not know him. He talked about community investment, legacy, opportunity, and responsible development. He described the graduation fund as one of his personal commitments to the neighborhood. My mouth went dry. His personal commitment. I had written that section because of my mother. I had built the safeguards. I had argued for the reporting language. He spoke about it like a man describing a garden he had never watered. One committee member, a woman named Miss Alvarez, asked a question about risk oversight. My father answered using sentences I had written, not ideas. Sentence. He even used my phrase, restricted use accountability framework. I know because I had hated that phrase after writing it, but kept it because it was clear. Hearing it come out of his mouth made my skin feel too small. Then Miss Alvarez looked at the packet and said, "Who prepared the risk model?" My father said, "I did, with informal input from my daughter." Informal input. That was when I spoke. I kept my voice calm. I prepared the risk model, the fund safeguards, and the contingency plan. The room shifted. Not dramatically. Just enough. Papers paused. Eyes lifted. Lorraine's smile hardened. My father turned toward me slowly. "Maya," he said, like I had spilled something. I said, "The version I submitted had the graduation fund in a protected section. This version changed that language." Dennis opened his legal pad. Lorraine inhaled. My father gave the room a sad little smile. "And then he did it. He made me the problem. Apparently your little evidence habit is making everyone uncomfortable," he said. I felt the words hit, but I did not move. He continued, "You have been dead weight for years. I let you help so you could feel useful. There are insults that hurt because they are new. That one hurt because it was old." He had been saying it in smaller ways my whole life. Every time he credited himself for work I did. Every time he told me to be easier. Every time he turned my caution into a flaw. Every time he used my competence, then mocked the part of me that made it possible. The room waited for me to break. I could feel it. Maybe they expected tears. Maybe anger. Maybe a daughter begging her father not to humiliate her in front of strangers. But humiliation only works the old way when you still want admission from the people doing it. And something had changed. I looked at the packet. I looked at my father. Then I looked at Miss Alvarez. I said, I would like a copy of the final submission packet for my records. My father laughed once. Oh, okay. Because now we are pretending this is a courtroom. It was meant to make me look ridiculous. But all I could think was, oh, okay, because apparently asking for the document you used to erase me is dramatic now. I did not say that out loud. Not then. I just repeated, I would like a copy. Miss Alvarez watched me for a second. Then she nodded to the committee secretary. My father's face changed. Only slightly. But I saw it. For the first time that morning, he was not annoyed. He was calculating. That was the moment I stopped asking them to admit what they did and started proving what they signed. I left the meeting with the committee packet, 3 business cards, and 17 missed calls from Lorraine by the time I reached my car. I did not answer. My father sent one text. You embarrassed yourself. I read it twice. Then I put my phone face down. There was a time when that message would have destroyed my day. I would have called him. I would have explained. I would have apologized for my tone while secretly hoping he would apologize for the injury. That version of me had spent years standing outside locked emotional doors, asking, can you see me? That morning, I finally stopped knocking. I drove home in silence. Not peaceful silence. Not yet. This was the kind of silence that happens after a house alarm turns off, and you are left staring at the broken window. I changed out of my blazer. I made coffee I did not drink. Then I opened my laptop. I created a folder called Brooks Project Record. Inside it, I created subfolders. Original drafts. Email threads. Calendar invite. Committee packet. Graduation fund language. Notary. County records. I was not building a revenge file. I was building a reality file. There is a difference. Revenge tries to hurt people back. A reality file stops them from moving the walls while you are still inside the room. The first thing I did was compare the final packet to my last submitted draft. The changes were not random. They were surgical. My author credit was removed. The oversight language was softened. The graduation fund restriction was rewritten. A reporting requirement was moved from mandatory to recommended. The project development reserve became broader. My father had not misunderstood the plan. He had stripped out the parts that limited his discretion. Then he had kept the parts that made him look safe. That was important, because it meant the theft was not emotional. It was operational. The second thing I checked was the notary reference number. I did not know yet whether it tied to a document my father had submitted, a related property affirmation, or some internal certification. But I knew enough to know that notary logs do not exist for decoration. Someone had appeared. Someone had signed. Someone had recorded a date and time. The packet had a reference, so I requested the notary register entry. I did it formally, not with accusations, not with drama. Just a clean request using the information listed in the packet. Then I pulled my calendars. Work calendar, personal calendar, shared family calendar, old text messages, anything that could show where people claimed to be and when. At midnight, I found the first contradiction. My father had told the committee that the final authorization happened after family review on a Friday morning. But on that Friday morning, he had sent me a message asking whether the graduation fund language was really necessary. That meant the language was not yet finalized. The notary reference was dated the day before. So, either the final document was notarized before the final language existed, or my father had lied about the review. Neither option was clean. I sat back and looked at the screen. It is strange when the truth starts moving. At first, it feels like one loose thread. Then you pull, and the fabric does not tear. It reveals a seam. The next morning, Lorraine came to my apartment uninvited. I knew it was her before I opened the door because she knocked like someone performing patience for an invisible audience. 3 soft knocks. A pause. 2 more. I opened the door with the chain still on. Her face fell when she saw it. Maya, she said. Really? I said, what do you need? She pressed her lips together. Your father is very hurt. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny. Because it was predictable. My father had called me dead weight in front of strangers, stolen my work, risked a graduation fund, and possibly misrepresented documents. But he was hurt. Of course he was. Lorraine said, "You have always needed so much validation." There it was again. Need. As if wanting credit for your own work was need. As if wanting records to match reality was need. As if asking your family not to steal from you was emotional hunger. I thought of Elena's meme. Me when I'm needy but my family is busy turning fraud into a bonding activity. I did not laugh. I said, "I am not discussing this without records." Her expression sharpened. "Records are not family." "No," I said. "That is why they are reliable." She stared at me. Then she lowered her voice. "You are going to make everyone think your father did something wrong." I looked at her through the gap in the chain. "Did he?" She did not answer. That was the first honest thing she gave me. After she left, I requested county deed history. The property tied to the project had always been described to me as family held, but never clearly explained. When I was younger, my father would say, "That land has been in this family longer than you have." It was a strange phrase. Longer than you have. Not longer than you have been alive. Longer than you have. As if I were not fully part of the measurement. Once, at 19, I asked why my name was not listed anywhere in the old family planning documents, when my cousins' names appeared in side notes. My father closed the folder before I finished the question. He said, "You would not understand the structure." I believed him. That sentence is one of the most dangerous things a parent can give a child. You would not understand. It can keep you out of bank accounts, wills, medical conversations, property decisions, and your own history. It can make ignorance feel like obedience. By 31, I understood enough, so I asked for the deed history. 2 days later, the notary register response came through. The entry was not everything, but it was enough to make my pulse slow down. The appointment time did not match the sequence my father gave the committee. The listed document description was tied to a property certification connected to the funding packet, and the witness line had Dennis Caldwell's name attached to related materials. Dennis, who had sat in the meeting pretending I was only informal help. Dennis, who had repeated that everyone knew I helped. Dennis, whose legal pad stayed closed while my father erased me. I sent a copy to my personal email, saved it, and printed it. I did not call my father. That mattered. Old Maya would have called. Old Maya would have asked why. Old Maya would have given him a chance to explain the contradiction before anyone else saw it. Old Maya still believed that if she handed people the truth gently enough, they might choose decency voluntarily. New Maya had finally learned that some people only respect a boundary when it arrives with a timestamp. If you have ever been treated like the family backup plan until your work became useful, type ME, not because you owe anyone your story, but because someone else may need to know they are not imagining it. The county records office called me on a Thursday afternoon while I was sitting in my car outside a grocery store. I remember because I had a carton of eggs in the passenger seat, and one of those cheap bouquets wrapped in plastic on the floor. I had bought the flowers for myself for no reason except that the week had been awful, and the yellow ones looked stubborn. The woman on the phone introduced herself as Claire Benton from the county recorder's office. Her voice was careful. Not cold. Careful. She said she had received my records request, and wanted to clarify which property sequence I was reviewing. I gave her the parcel number from the packet. There was a pause. Then she said, "Are you looking specifically at the recent certification, or the transfer history?" I said, "Both, if possible." Another pause. Then she said, "You may want to request the transfer history." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I asked, "Why?" She did not speculate. Good record keepers do not speculate. She said, "The sequence may be relevant to your question." The sequence. There it was again. Not the emotion. Not the argument. The sequence. I thanked her, requested the transfer history formally, and sat in my car until the eggs were no longer cold. That night, my father called. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. Then Lorraine. Then Dennis. Then my father again. Finally, he sent a message. We need to talk before you do something permanent. Permanent. Not wrong. Not unfair. Permanent. He was not worried about healing. He was worried about records. I replied with one sentence. Please put any project-related communication in writing. He did not answer for 26 minutes. Then he wrote, do not turn this into a legal issue. I stared at the message. Then I said out loud to my empty apartment, oh okay, because apparently you can turn my work into your funding packet, but I am rude for turning your packet into evidence. It was the first time I laughed without wanting to cry. A small laugh. A tired one. But real. The next morning, Lorraine posted a vague quote on social media about daughters who mistake independence for bitterness. I did not respond. A cousin sent it to me with 3 question marks. I did not respond to that either. My father had always liked public pressure. He understood that if enough people watched me, I might perform forgiveness just to make the room less uncomfortable. That had worked when I was younger. At 22, I apologized at Thanksgiving because my father said I was ruining dinner by asking why he had used my tax refund to cover an expense he had promised to repay. At 26, I stayed quiet. When Lorraine told relatives, I was too career-focused to help the family, even though I had spent the previous weekend fixing my father's vendor records. At 29, I smiled through a church fundraiser where my father accepted praise for a donor tracking system I built while sick with the flu. I had been trained to protect the atmosphere, but the atmosphere was always built around their comfort. This time, I protected the record. That changed everything. Because once I stopped reacting emotionally, my father lost his favorite weapon. He could argue with anger. He could shame tears. He could dismiss confusion. He did not know what to do with a daughter who replied with attachments. 2 days later, the loan committee secretary emailed all parties. There would be a follow-up review. The committee had received additional documentation that raised questions about authorship, fund restrictions, and property certification. The meeting would include representatives from the county records office. My father called within 3 minutes. I did not answer. He left a voicemail. His voice was low and controlled. Maya, this has gone far enough. You are putting the entire project at risk because you feel slighted. That is selfish, and you know it. I played it twice. Not because it hurt. Because it showed the frame. He wanted this to be about my feelings. If it was about my feelings, he could call me sensitive. If it was about documents, he had to answer questions. Lorraine left a voicemail next. Honey, nobody erased you. This is just a family misunderstanding that got bigger than it needed to. We can handle it privately. Privately. That word kept appearing. Private correction, private apology, private conversation, private pressure. But the humiliation had been public. The funding packet was public to the committee. The altered graduation fund language affected public money. The property certification was part of an official record. They wanted privacy only after the truth became inconvenient. Dennis sent an email. The subject line was concern. That alone annoyed me. He wrote, Maya, as someone who has known you a long time, I would advise you to think carefully before attaching your name to a family dispute. Paperwork can be interpreted many ways. I read that line 3 times. Paperwork can be interpreted many ways. Maybe. But timestamps are less flexible. So I forwarded his email into my evidence folder. Then I made a small note under it. Potential witness pressure. At work that week, I was calmer than I expected. Not happy. Not fine. Calm. There is a kind of calm that comes when your heart stops auditioning for people who already cast you as the problem. I did my job. I answered emails. I reviewed a vendor risk escalation. I ate lunch outside with Elena. She watched me pull a stack of printed records from my tote bag and said, Maya, remember who you are. I looked at her. She pointed at the folder. Not in a dramatic movie way. I mean, remember who you are. Woman with 3 backup drives and a color-coded paper trail. These people picked the wrong spreadsheet, daughter. I laughed. really laughed. For a few seconds, I was not a betrayed daughter. I was just a tired woman eating a sandwich with my friend, remembering that competence could be funny when it was not being used against me. That became important later. Because betrayal tries to make you feel small enough to forget your own shape. Elena reminded me that I was still there. Not needy. Not dramatic. Not dead weight. There. The follow-up meeting was scheduled for the next Tuesday at 10 in the morning. My father spent the weekend trying to prevent it. He texted. He emailed. He had Lorraine call my aunt. My aunt called me and said, "Your father says you are trying to destroy everything he built." I asked, "Did he say what document I destroyed?" She went quiet. Then she said, "I do not know the details." I said, "Then you should ask for them before you defend him." She hung up politely. That was new. People were still uncomfortable, but their discomfort was shifting direction. Before, they were uncomfortable because I challenged the family story. Now, they were uncomfortable because the family story had a file number attached. My father sent one final email before the meeting. It had an attachment, a statement. He wanted me to sign it. The statement said I had contributed informal support to the project, that any misunderstanding about authorship had been unintentional, and that I fully supported the current funding structure. There was one sentence about the graduation fund. I trust my father to administer all community benefit funds in the spirit of the original project. I leaned back from the screen. That sentence was the whole game. If I signed it, he could say I had approved the softened language. If I signed it, the committee would treat the record issue as a family argument resolved privately. If I signed it, the graduation fund would become a promise controlled by the same man who had already removed the protection clause. I replied, "I will not sign this." He wrote back almost immediately, "Then whatever happens next is on you." That was the clearest thing he ever said. Not because it was true, because it revealed how he saw consequences. If he lied and I stayed quiet, the family survived. If he lied and I told the truth, I caused the damage. That is how image-controlled families work. The wound belongs to the person who names it. At this point, would you confront them in the room or wait for the record to speak first? Confront is 1, wait is 2. On Tuesday morning, I wore the same navy blazer I had worn to the first meeting. That was not an accident. I wanted my father to remember the room. I wanted him to see that the daughter he humiliated had not changed into someone louder. She had changed into someone prepared. I arrived 7 minutes early. This time, he was not already smiling. He stood near the window with Lorraine beside him. Dennis sat at the table, flipping through his legal pad like it might rescue him. Miss Alvarez was there. So were 2 other committee members, the committee secretary, and Claire Benton from the county recorder's office. I recognized her voice before she introduced herself. She looked exactly like she sounded. Careful. Professional. Unimpressed by performance. My father approached me before the meeting began. He kept his voice low. "You can still stop this." I said, "Stop what?" He blinked. The embarrassment. I looked at him for a long second. Then I said, "You called me dead weight in this room." His jaw tightened. "This is not the time. That was the time you chose." He stepped back. Lorraine touched his arm. Not to comfort him. To remind him people were watching. The meeting began at 10:03. Miss Alvarez opened with a summary. The committee had reviewed the project packet, the authorship question, the graduation fund language, the notary reference, and the property certification sequence. My father wore his concerned public face. It was one of his best. He leaned forward and said, "I want to start by saying this has been very painful for our family. Maya is talented, but she has always struggled with feeling included." There it was. The emotional frame. I was not erased. I felt excluded. I was not stolen from. I struggled. I was not protecting a fund. I was making family pain public. Lorraine nodded gently, as if she were watching him survive a tragedy. Dennis wrote something down. Ms. Alvarez did not nod. She said, "Mr. Brooks, we are going to focus on the documents." I looked down at my folder so my face would not show what I felt. Not joy. Not victory. Relief. A woman in authority had just refused the family fog. My father said, "Of course." Miss Alvarez continued. "The final packet lists you as preparer of the risk model and project safeguards. Miss Brooks has provided draft history indicating she prepared those sections." My father said. As I explained, Maya assisted informally. Claire Benton looked at her notes. Miss Alvarez said, "The graduation fund language also changed materially between Miss Brooks's draft and the submitted version." Lorraine spoke then. "May I just say, the spirit of the fund never changed. This is really about wording." Claire looked up. "Restrictions are wording." The room went still. It was such a simple sentence. Restrictions are wording. That was the point. My father could charm people with spirit. Records lived in wording. Miss Alvarez turned to him. "Mr. Brooks, who authorized the final version after the restriction language changed?" My father glanced at Dennis. Dennis looked down. My father said, "The family reviewed it." I said, "Which family?" He turned toward me. "Maya." I kept my voice even. "Which family members reviewed the final version after the protected graduation fund language was removed?" He said, "That is not a fair characterization." Claire said, "The language was changed from a restricted allocation to a flexible reserve." My father's face hardened. "Well, yes, but that was an administrative adjustment." I opened my folder. I did not pull out everything. That is another lesson I learned at work. You do not bury the key fact under all the supporting facts. You lead with the one that forces the next question. I handed Miss Alvarez the packet comparison and the notary register entry. "I would like the meeting record to reflect that the notary timestamp predates the final review my father claimed occurred." My father said, "This is absurd." Miss Alvarez looked at Claire. Claire reviewed the paper and then opened her own folder. "The register entry does show the appointment occurred before the claimed family review date." My father said, "That does not mean anything improper happened." Claire's voice stayed level. "It means the sequence described in the committee packet is inaccurate." Inaccurate. Such a clean word. So much destruction inside it. Dennis cleared his throat. "I think we should be careful here. Richard may have used shorthand." Claire looked at him. "Were you present at the notary appointment?" Dennis's pen stopped moving. He said, "I was aware of it." "That was not my question," Claire said. I will remember that sentence forever. Not because it was dramatic. Because it was what my whole life had been missing. That was not my question. My father had survived for decades by answering the question he preferred. Claire would not let him. Dennis said, "I was present for part of the process." Claire said, "The related witness notation includes your name." He adjusted his glasses. Lorraine's hands folded tighter in her lap. Miss Alvarez asked my father, why was Miss Brooks not included in the final review, if her risk language was being used? My father leaned back. His voice changed. It became colder. Because Maya complicates things. She has always needed to feel indispensable. I felt the old wound open. Not fully, just enough to remind me where it had been. "Can you see me?" The question rose in my throat, but I did not ask him. I knew the answer. He could see me. That was why he kept trying to make everyone else look away. I said, "You used my work because it made the project fundable. You removed my name because you wanted control. You changed the fund language because protection limited you. You called me dead weight because you needed the room to forget who carried the plan." Nobody spoke. My voice had not risen. That made it land harder. My father stared at me like I had broken a rule older than language. Maybe I had. Maybe the oldest rule in our family was that he could define reality, and I could only react to it. Miss Alvarez turned to Claire. "Can you explain the deed history issue?" My father moved before Claire answered. It was not much. A shift in his chair. A small inhale. But I saw it. The property. The closed folder from when I was 19. The phrase, "longer than you have." The refusal to show me the structure. The deed history was where his confidence started leaking. Claire opened the transfer record. The property history shows a transfer and certification sequence that does not align with the representation in the submitted funding materials. My father said, that is a technical issue. Claire said, it affects how the property control was represented. Miss Alvarez asked, does it affect the committee's understanding of authority over project funds? Claire said, it may. There are words that sound small in normal life, but become enormous in official rooms. May. Inaccurate. Sequence. Restriction. Those words do not scream. They do not need to. The deed history did not raise its voice. It just refused to lie for them. Miss Alvarez asked for a pause. During that pause, my father walked into the hallway. Lorraine followed him. Dennis stayed behind for 3 seconds, then went too. I stayed seated. Claire remained in the room. She did not look at me with pity. I appreciated that. Pity would have made me cry. Professional neutrality kept me upright. After a minute, she said, you were very organized. I said, it is my job. She nodded. Then she said, sometimes it is also survival. I looked at her. She looked back at her file. That was all. But it was enough. When everyone returned, my father's face had changed again. Now he was wounded. Not angry. Wounded. That was the face he used when consequences got close enough to touch him. He said, I would like to request that this matter be handled privately while we correct any administrative misunderstandings. Administrative misunderstandings. Lorraine added, this has already been very hard on the family. We do not need to make it more public than it has to be. Miss Alvarez said, the committee record will reflect the documentation reviewed. My father looked at me. Just for a second. It was the look I had been trained to fear. The look that said, fix this. The look that said, protect me. The look that said, be the daughter again. I felt it hit the old place. Then pass through. I said, I want the record corrected. His mouth tightened. I continued. I want authorship corrected. I want the graduation fund restrictions restored. I want the committee to review the property representation with the county record included. And I will not sign any statement saying this was an informal misunderstanding. Lorraine whispered, Maya. I looked at her. For years, she had made my name sound like a warning. This time, it sounded like a request. I did not answer it. Miss Alvarez noted each point. The committee did not approve the packet that day. The funding terms were paused. The authorship record was reopened. The graduation fund language had to be restored before reconsideration. The property certification had to be reviewed against the deed history. Dennis's witness statement was no longer treated as neutral. And my father's beautiful public story had to share a room with the documents. That was all I wanted. Not destruction. Not screaming. Not revenge the way people imagine it. Just the truth standing where he had put his lie. If receipts beat excuses here, type proof. And be honest once someone erases your work in public, do they deserve a private correction? The fallout did not happen all at once. Real consequences rarely do. They arrive like mail, one envelope at a time. First, the committee requested corrected documents, then the partner organization asked why the fund language had changed. Then a board member who had praised my father at church called him to ask about the property certification. Then Lorraine deleted her vague social media post about bitter daughters. Then my aunt called again. This time, she did not tell me my father was hurt. She asked, what did he do? I said, you should ask him. She said, he says it is complicated. I said it is documented. She was quiet. Then she said, Maya, did he really call you dead weight? I looked out my kitchen window. There was a man walking a dog across the street. The dog kept stopping to sniff every tree like the world had hidden messages everywhere. I said yes. My aunt exhaled. I am sorry. It was not enough to fix anything. But it was the first family apology I received that did not ask me to repair the person who hurt me. So I accepted it. My father waited 3 days before trying a different approach. He sent a long email. The subject line was moving forward. That phrase alone told me everything. People love moving forward when they do not want to account for where they stepped. He wrote that emotions had run high. They had not. Mine had been controlled. His had been managed. He wrote that he had never intended to minimize my contribution. He had. He wrote that the committee room comment was regrettable. Not cruel. Not false. Regrettable. He wrote that we should not let paperwork divide family. Paperwork had not divided us. Paperwork had revealed how divided we already were. Near the end, he wrote, "I am willing to acknowledge that your assistance was more substantial than the packet reflected." Assistance. Still, even then, I replied with one line, "My authorship is not assistance." He did not respond. Lorraine did. She wrote, "You got what you wanted. I hope it was worth humiliating your father." I read it while standing in my bathroom, brushing my teeth. There was toothpaste foam in my mouth and I still managed to laugh. Not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable and completely believable at the same time. They had humiliated me in a committee room. They had erased my work. They had weakened a fund meant to protect students. They had misrepresented records. But when the official timeline caught up with them, I was the humiliating one. There is a point in recovery when the manipulation does not stop hurting, but it stops confusing you. That was where I was. I could still feel the sting, but I no longer turned it inward. I no longer asked, "What did I do wrong?" I asked, "What are they trying to make me carry?" That question saved me more than once. The corrected packet was eventually submitted with my authorship acknowledged for the risk framework and fund safeguards. The graduation fund was restored to a restricted section, with reporting requirements. The development reserve language was narrowed. The property control representation was amended. The committee did not give my father the clean, glowing approval he had expected. The project survived, but not as his private stage. That mattered to me. I did not want the students to lose because my father lied. I wanted the protection restored. I wanted the truth attached. I wanted the fund to be harder to touch. That was the difference between vengeance and boundary. Vengeance would have burned the whole thing down, just to watch him cough on the smoke. Boundary made sure he could not use the building to trap someone else. Dennis disappeared from the family conversation for a while. I heard through my aunt that he was taking space. That was a funny phrase for a man who had spent years occupying rooms where he did not belong. When I finally saw him again, it was outside a grocery store. He looked smaller without a table in front of him. He said, "Maya, I hope you know I never meant to hurt you." I said, "You meant to help him." He looked offended, then tired. I was trying to keep peace. "No," I said. "You were trying to keep his version of peace." He did not have an answer. Most enablers do not. They mistake silence for peace, because the silence was never costing them anything. After that, I changed my routines. Not dramatically. I did not move across the country. I did not reinvent myself. I did smaller things that felt larger than they looked. I removed myself from the family shared calendar. I changed the passwords on accounts I had created for them. I stopped answering technical questions disguised as casual conversation. I told my father I would not review another document for him. He wrote, "So this is who you are now?" I almost answered with a paragraph. Then I heard Elena's voice in my head. "Remember who you are, woman with 3 backup drives and a color-coded paper trail." So I replied, "Yes." One word. It felt better than any speech. Lorraine tried to reach me through guilt. She sent pictures from family dinners. She said people missed me. She said my father was aging. She said bitterness takes a toll. I did not argue. That was new too. I used to believe every false statement required a correction. Now I understood that some corrections are for the record, and some are just invitations back into the same room. I kept the record clean. I let the room go. About 6 weeks after the committee review, my father came to my apartment. This time, he did not bring Lorraine. He stood outside my door, holding an envelope. I opened the door but did not invite him in. He looked around the hallway like he expected witnesses. There were none. Just a neighbor's bicycle and a flickering ceiling light. He said, "I wanted to talk like adults." I said, "You can talk." He held out the envelope. Inside was a printed apology, I could see the first line. I regret that recent events created confusion. I did not take it. He said, Maya. His voice softened. That was dangerous. His softness had always been more effective than his anger. Anger made me defensive. Softness made me hopeful. But hope without evidence is how I had stayed too long. I said, does it say you called me dead weight to discredit me? He looked down. Do we have to keep using that phrase? Yes. His jaw tightened. It was a heated moment. It was a prepared room. He looked at me then. Really looked. For 1 second, I thought maybe he would finally say it. Not the polished apology. Not regret. Not confusion. The thing itself. I stole your work. I used your love for your mother's memory. I tried to control public opinion. I called you worthless because I needed you small. I waited. He said, I do not know why you need to make everything so hard. And there it was. The answer. Can you see me? No. Not if seeing me required him to see himself. I said. Then we are done. He looked stunned. Maybe he expected anger. Maybe tears. Maybe one more negotiation. But done is a quiet word. It does not perform. It closes. He said, you would cut off your own father over paperwork. I said, no, I am stepping away because the paperwork proved the pattern. He stared at me for a long time. Then he slipped the envelope back under his arm. As he walked away, he said, you will regret being alone. I closed the door. For the first time in my life, that sentence did not scare me, because I was not alone. I had myself. I had Elena. I had a clean record. I had a home where the phone could ring without becoming a command. A month later, I moved. Not far, just to a smaller place on the other side of town with better light and worse parking. The kitchen was tiny. The living room had one window that caught sun in the late afternoon. The first week there, I bought a small wooden table and placed it by that window. No family documents on it. No emergency forms. No unpaid favors. No folders full of someone else's crisis. Just coffee, a plant I was trying not to kill, and one yellow bouquet because I had decided flowers did not need a crisis to be allowed in my home. One afternoon, Elena came over with takeout. She walked in, looked at the sunlight across the floor, and said, and just like that, I'm back to loving life again. I laughed. This time, nothing in the laugh hurt. I said, that is dramatic. She said, so was your father committing paperwork gymnastics in a bank conference room? Fair. We ate noodles at the little table. My phone was in the other room. I heard it buzz once. Then again. I did not get up. That may not sound like a victory if you grew up in a family where silence was allowed. But I did not. In my family, silence meant punishment. Silence meant someone was disappointed. Silence meant I had to guess the problem and solve it before the next explosion. Silence meant abandonment. But in that apartment, with sunlight on the floor and noodles going cold because Elena was telling a story badly, silence meant something else. It meant no one was demanding an explanation. No one was rewriting the room. No one was using family as a leash. Silence meant freedom. I kept one copy of the final corrected record in a file cabinet. Not on the table. Not where I could see it every day. I did not need to worship the evidence. I only needed to know it existed. Sometimes people think proof gives you closure because everyone finally admits what happened. That is not always true. My father never fully admitted it. Lorraine never became kind. Dennis never became brave. But proof gave me a different kind of closure. It ended the debate inside me. It stopped the part of me that kept asking whether I had misunderstood, whether I had been too sensitive, whether wanting credit was selfish, whether protecting money meant for students was dramatic, whether a father calling his daughter dead weight in public was somehow a family misunderstanding. The record did not heal me. It gave me a floor to stand on while I healed myself. And that is why I am telling this as a fictional story created for entertainment and educational purposes. Not because everyone should handle conflict the same way. Not because a video can give legal, financial, or family advice. but because stories like this can teach something real about self-worth, personal boundaries, and protecting yourself from manipulation. If someone keeps making you defend your memory, preserve the record. If someone calls your boundaries cruelty, look at what they lose when your boundary holds. If someone says you are destroying the family by telling the truth, ask why the family needed a lie to survive. My father wanted me to believe I was dead weight. But dead weight does not build the plan. Dead weight does not protect the fund. Dead weight does not find the timestamp. Dead weight does not walk out of the room with the record intact. He was wrong. He had always been wrong. And the strangest part is, I no longer need him to know that. That is the freedom I did not expect. Not the committee's correction. Not the deed history. Not the notary log. Those mattered. But the real ending was quieter. It was me, sitting by my window on a Sunday morning, drinking coffee while my phone stayed silent. No apology to chase. No argument to win. No father to convince. No stepmother to soften. No witness to expose. Just light across the table. Just breath in my own chest. Just a life that finally belonged to me. Silence stopped being the place they left me. It became the door I locked behind them. If you are angry for Maya, say it. If this reminds you of something you lived through, you can share one word, or the whole story. And be honest, should she ever forgive them, or was the boundary the real ending?